I'm Judge Anita Laster Mays, and I am the moderator for this session of Know Your Rights. I have a quick bio on me, so I'll just read it. I attended John Adams High School and graduated from James Ford Rhodes High School in 1982 after they started busing. I continued my education at The Ohio State University, majored in Accounting and Management Information Systems, graduating in 1986. While a student, I became the co-founder of the Central Ohio student chapter of the National Association of Black Accountants, as well as becoming one of the first inducted into the Ohio State's business fraternity. So one of the first females, it was two of us that came in, Alpha Kappa Psi, a business fraternity. Judge Mays also received the Pacesetter Award given to the college's top students who are selected on the basis of academic performance and demonstrated leadership ability. In 1987, I worked at the Metro Health Medical Center as a financial systems analyst. So I wrote financial programs for Metro to make sure their money was being tracked right. I started at Cleveland Marshall, graduated in 1992. I passed the bar on my first attempt in 1992, and I joined the assistant prosecutor's office, was a prosecutor. I worked in the clerk's office, and after working in the clerk's office, I became judge in 2003 with the Cleveland Municipal Court, was judge for 11 years, and in 2014 elected to the Ohio 8th District Court of Appeals. I am a member of Sigma Gamma Rho, and wife and mother of 3, and also was the drug court judge where 80% of the individuals remained drug-free after we finished them through drug court. And I believe that with God and hard work, anything is possible. We also have attorney Joy Kennedy. And she is a licensed clinical social worker for the state of Ohio and assistant public defender for the Cuyahoga County Public Defender's Office and the Criminal Division. She has worked in the office for 10 years and has represented juveniles who have been charged in delinquency matters, parents who are involved in abuse, neglect, and/or dependency matters, and adults who face felony charges. She has been a proud member of Sigma Gamma Rho for over 22 years. She serves as the legal advisor for the central region of Sigma Gamma Rho for 8 years. And next to her is attorney James Evans. James is attorney with the Cuyahoga County Public Defender's Office and has been with the office since 2005. He is currently assigned to the Adult Felony Division, where he represents adult criminal defendants charged with felony-level cases in Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas. He was previously assigned to the Public Defender's Juvenile Division, where he represented juveniles alleged to have committed acts of delinquency and unruliness. He also defended parents and guardians in cases of alleged child neglect and abuse initiated by the Cuyahoga County Department of Children and Family Services. He began his legal career as an assistant city prosecutor for the city of Cleveland in 2004, where he prosecuted misdemeanor criminal cases and traffic matters. He also worked as a paralegal with the city of Cleveland and Cuyahoga County prosecutor before becoming an attorney. James is married to our Soror Evans, who is a member of Sigma Gamma Rho, Alpha Lambda Sigma, and they have 4 daughters. James is an active member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, Cleveland Alumni Chapter, and currently serves on the chapter's board of directors. And last but not least is Chief Andre Gonzalez. And I met Chief Gonzalez when I was a prosecutor, so we've been knowing each other almost 20 years now. Yeah. And he is the Chief of Police for the Cuyahoga Metropolitan Housing Authority since April 2007. Chief Gonzalez is a 34-year veteran who began his law enforcement career with the City of Cleveland Division of Police. He worked his way through the ranks of detective, sergeant, and lieutenant. He served 8 years as commander of the Cleveland Police 3rd Neighborhood District, which encompassed various diverse neighborhoods, the Central Business District and Entertainment District. He is a graduate of the FBI National Academy and the Police Executive Leadership College. He graduated magna cum laude, which is excellent, from Cleveland State University with a degree in urban studies concentrating in public administration. Chief Gonzalez serves on the board of directors for the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center, the Partnership for a Safer Cleveland, and the Cleveland Boys and Girls Club. He also serves as an advisory board member to the State of Ohio Family Violence Prevention Center and the Ohio Executive Institute Committee. He is also a member of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, NOBLE. Chief Gonzalez has over 20 years of progressive experience in leadership, management, and supervision. He fluently speaks, reads, and writes Spanish. And so this is our distinguished panel this morning, or this afternoon. And so one of the things that we wanted to do with this panel, we wanted to give a scenario that I had seen in a court case that I had. And we thought it would be good to discuss these instances. So here's the scenario. 4 young males were driving in an automobile. 3 was 17 years old and the driver was 18. They were traveling with their music at an elevated level and at 42 miles per hour in a 35 mile per hour zone. The music draws the attention of the police and notice that they are traveling above the speed limit. They turn on their radar and activate lights and sirens. The police approach on both sides, and the driver is asked to produce a license. His partner asks the identity of the passengers. The passenger behind the driver starts to record. The police tells the passenger he can't record them. He says, "I have a right to record." The police ask them all to exit the vehicle. The driver says, "What did we do? We don't have to." The police call for backup, and 2 males voluntarily exit the vehicle, but the driver and the passenger that was recording are removed by the police. The passenger refused to identify himself and continues to record. So I'll ask Chief Gonzalez this question. Can an officer ask all occupants to identify themselves?
The officer could ask everyone in the vehicle to identify themselves, but the officer's got to have a good reason for asking those individuals that are not driving. Well, only one person's driving the vehicle, but we got to have a real good reason for asking the other 3 individuals in the car for their identification. Typically, some of those reasons may be the officer, for whatever reason, observes, sees stuff that doesn't look right. Another thing too is something that's very important to all the officers is that roughly 70% of the time that an officer gets hurt or killed, it's in relation to a traffic stop, 70% of the time. So I say those things because automatically when the officer goes up to a vehicle for whatever, it could be a very minor traffic violation, there's always a concern in the back of the officer's mind. But even with that concern, the officer is totally within his right and his responsibility to ask for the identification of the driver. If the officer is going to ask or engage with all the other occupants in the vehicle, the officer has to have a good reason to extend beyond the driver and ask the other persons for their for identification. It's not a give me, it's not a guarantee. One of those reasons could be that there may be some activity or that the members sitting in the back seat are exchanging or some body gestures or something, or maybe some movement down towards the floor of the car. Those are good reasons for now engaging. But if the passengers are all sitting in the vehicle and they're all being respectful and they are all just not acting out of line, so to speak, then at that point the officer does not have a right to ask for their identification or even ask who they are.
But then if everyone's acting right and the officer asks them, what should the individuals do?
Well, if the officer asks a question, then I think it's just the way we grew up. Somebody asks you a question, yes. We should all answer the question. How you answer the question is really the key here. Because if you answer in a smart aleck way, or in a disrespectful way, or in a way that gives an officer, a person, an alert stump, so to speak, then we're gonna dig. Let me just say this, Judge. You know, officers, policemen, are parents, we're fathers, we're mothers, we're sons, we're daughters, we're all that. We are what you are. And as a father, when I question or I ask my son, what is going on? My daughter, what is going on? My reaction or the next steps is going to be depending on how they react to me. And so in many ways, it's no different when an officer engages an individual in a traffic stop or even in a corner. What happens next is really going to depend on that level of interaction, on whether or not the officer's suspicion is activated. I mean, officers can't act just based on suspicion. We got to have a little bit more than that. But the fact that the officer has suspicion or a level of suspicion is certainly grounds for continuing to dig, continuing to ask further questions to see what is going on.
Yes.
And,
Attorney
and,
Evans.
and to piggyback on what Chief Gonzalez is saying, you know, I've worked majority of my legal career with juveniles in juvenile court. Although I'm now in the adult division, some of the conversations are still the same. And what he just said is absolutely true, in that a lot of times, although it may not necessarily be right, and you may not feel within your right that the police officers are doing, they're violating your rights, they shouldn't have stopped you, they shouldn't be asking you these questions. Realistically speaking, a lot of times, as Chief just said, they don't want to mess with you. They don't want to dig at you. All they want to do is the little bit of reason why they stopped you and move on your way. Because, as he said, they have families, they have kids, they have a job, so do you. But realistically speaking, if you give them lip, if you give them attitude, if you give them a reason to dig or mess with you, they may very well do that. And if they do that, unfortunately, it may lead into even more than the original reason why they stopped you. So the hard thing to do, although the best thing to do, is just to follow along with it. Be polite, be compliant, because you want to be able to walk away, drive away, whatever, rather than them putting you in the back of their car and putting you down in jail somewhere.
I'll add that one of the things that gets us into trouble is when we talk about the reason why they're asking to see the ID or the identification of the other people in the car. Chief Gonzalez said if they have good reason. Well, who determines the good reason? Not you. You don't determine the good reason. The officer does. So you ask the questions. Why are you stopping us? Why do you want to see my identification? And you hear the answer. Now, you may not like the answer, or it may not be clear, but if it is unlawful or the reason why the stop is happening is wrong altogether, that's when the attorneys come in at. That's when those individuals who are going to defend your honor and your right come in at versus you. Because if they don't give you a good enough answer and then it goes back and forth, well, I don't like that reason, well, I'm not showing you this or I'm not giving you that, then you have now violated something in terms of him asking for your identity and giving that to him. Because if you do not identify yourself when you're asked to by an officer, you could be found in violation or breaking the law.
What happens if the passengers don't have ID? Because they're not driving, so the driver, of course, should have ID. But if the passengers don't, and it's a good reason why they're being asked and they should present it, what happens if they don't have it?
You know, that's a very good question, because many times when we are interacting with juveniles, with kids under 18, the truth is that a young person growing up one of the last things they think about is to have identification with them. And then if they do have identification with them, it's typically in the form of some school identification. So the fact that a young person, or even any person, does not have identification does not mean that that's the end of the stop or that it needs to escalate beyond that. However, if you are the driver of the vehicle, there is a very, very high expectation that you will have a driver's license. And if you don't have a driver's license, you should have some form of positive identification on you. Here's what happens. Here's why we ask for identification. We ask for identification, very simple. We want to know who we're dealing with. We want to be able to verify that the individual that we are talking with is the person that you say you are. I mean, it's as simple as that. Beyond that, there are other ways that we can identify a person. I mean, we can grab a date of birth, we can grab a social security number, we can run it through our leads, we can do all those kinds of things to come up with an identification. It is a good idea to have an ID on you, but it's not a requirement. In our state, it's not a requirement unless you are operating a motor vehicle to have a driver's license. It's not a requirement to have some form of ID on you.
So, Twyla, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's exactly what I would say, which is if you're a passenger in the vehicle or whatever, even if you don't have an identification on you, again, be polite and cooperative with the officer, but give the officer your name, date of birth if they need that, or social security number, or some bit of identifying information, or a phone number to call a parent if it's a juvenile, so that that person may be able to verify, if that officer needs it, who the child is.
And then just one last note with that. Because of identity theft, so many people in the system may use their cousin's name, their brother's name, things of that nature, because that individual that the officer is questioning may have a warrant. And I used to say to those individuals that use someone else's name, I wish the name that you use had a murder warrant or something, because then they use the wrong name. But, and so that's why it's important that the officers know who they're dealing with. Okay, so I'll start on the other end with Attorney Kennedy. Do the passenger have a right to record?
I believe that, yes, I believe that a passenger does have a right to record. However, it cannot interfere with the officer's job or their role. If the officer is talking to the passenger, but they can't because you're too busy recording, or you won't provide your information because you're too busy recording, or you're preventing the officer from doing his role with the driver or anyone else, it becomes an interference and a problem, and they will ask you to stop, or they will stop you from interfering with them performing their function.
Okay, and Attorney Evans, would you like to comment on that?
I agree. I do believe that there is a right to record. Again, if that person is being, I don't want to use the word quiet, but again, it's not interfering, it's not doing anything to cause a scene, to interfere with anything that is going on with that officer and his duties while he's conducting the stop, while he's conducting an arrest or anything of that nature, then I do believe that that person has a right to record peacefully. Again, if he or she is being loud, is being boisterous, is being disruptive, is being something that either is interfering in the arrest or causing someone to be disorderly, I guess, and I don't want to be legalistic, that could be a problem, because then at that point, not only do I believe they can shut you from recording, but you could also lead to yourself getting arrested for interference with custody or disorderly conduct or something of that nature.
Okay, and since the passenger refused to identify himself and the driver, and the passenger continued to record, the officers then asked them to exit the vehicle. Can the officer do that? Chief?
I don't believe that a passenger in a vehicle that has a recording and is recording the officer, I don't believe that we, as policemen, have a right to ask that person to get out of the vehicle. We do not. In the state of Ohio, every citizen, regardless if you're under 18 or over 18, has a right to record any activity and any situation in public. We all have that right. There is nothing wrong with recording activity of a police officer, a judge, a senator, a mayor, a presidential candidate, whoever that person is. We all have a right to take a recording device out and record that person. It is not against the law. One of the things that I say about those recordings, whether you're sitting in a car or whether you're out in public, is when you are recording, if that's what you want to do, it's important that you do not become part of the recording. When you become part of the recording, now you're creating a conflict. Now you're raising an issue for the officer in regards to what you're trying to do versus exercising your First Amendment right, which is to record, which includes recording. So, in its simplest form, if you are in a vehicle and you decide you're not the driver, now I want to make it very clear, Judge, we got to make it very clear, counselors, that if there's a difference between driving the vehicle, being in control of the vehicle, and getting stopped, versus being a passenger in the vehicle and having been stopped. There's a big difference. There's different levels of responsibility for the driver as opposed to being a passenger in the vehicle. So a passenger in the vehicle really is, you have every right to record, whether you want to lower your window and record what the officer is doing or saying or whatever the case may be. I don't believe, and it is not good police practice, to ask a person to come out of a vehicle only because they're recording. If that's the only reason, the officer is going beyond what he or she should be doing. Now, if there's something else going on, if I am taking a recording device out and I'm recording you, and at the same time I'm going this, and at the same time I'm doing this, and by the look in your faces and your eyebrows going up, I know what you're talking about, right? Because I'm recording, but I'm also behaving in another way. I'm adding more to that recording that is now giving the officer some heightened level of suspicion, and the officer is saying, okay, now I've got to take control. Why is Andy Gonzalez moving around so much? Why is Andy Gonzalez reaching into the back? Why is he reaching down to the floor of the car? Does that make sense? So it really, at the core of the question, we don't have a right to ask somebody who's recording to step out of the vehicle. It must depend. Other factors have to play in when we ask any passenger of the vehicle to come out of the vehicle.
And, yes.
Thank you so much for giving that example. I work with young people in a high school setting, and sometimes the information that I share with them, it will get them in trouble because they don't delve deep into the situation or the understanding. They hear it's my right to record. Often, well, my question is, in terms of sensitivity, are officers, because I hear what you're saying, they actually have the right, but do they understand that the person that they're working with may not be as sensitive or have an understanding, and they're going to be a part of the situation. And I guess what I'm saying is that I hear the information that you're giving us, and I'm going to go and try and share this information with others that may get in trouble from hearing that. Because if, where I work, sometimes it's looked at as being an aggressive action. But when you gave that definition or that description, not that the reporting is always the aggressive action, that it could possibly be other things that are going on. The officers, do they view that as being an aggressive act in terms of reporting?
Well, from a police perspective, as an officer, whenever we walk up to a car, and by the way, whenever we walk up to a door, and whenever we walk up to another person, we are walking up with the understanding that at any given point, this thing may turn bad very quickly. We understand that. See, we all know who the policeman is, because typically they're wearing a uniform, badge, they have a car, the lights went on. Typically, you already know who they are, but we don't know who you are. And so automatically, during that interaction, the officer is at a disadvantage. So the responsibility for the officer is twofold. One is control the interaction so it does not get out of hand. And then the second one is to go home at night, to make sure that me, Andy Gonzalez, or the men and women that work in our department are not placed into harm's way. Another example that I like to talk about on that type of situation is there are times where we do come up to a young person in a vehicle, and they do comply. They follow exactly what we have taught them to do. With the introduction of these things here, we're finding that it's getting the kids into a pickle, so to speak. And here's what I mean. We can stop the vehicle. An officer will ask Andy Jr. for his driver's license. Andy Jr. will get his driver's license. Andy Jr. may say, my dad is in law enforcement, all right? But typically, because Andy Jr. knows that I want to know what is going on, just like the judge wants to know what's going on with her children, and we all want to know, Andy Jr. may say, I'm being stopped, I need to call my dad. So what happens with that? The officer standing outside, Andy Jr. now starts reaching into his pocket, into wherever it is that they have this thing. What's happening to the officer now?
He doesn't know.
The officer doesn't know that Andy Jr.'s responsibility is to call his dad. All the officer knows at that point is that something is going wrong. This is not normal. And then Andy Jr. pulls out his phone. The officer's relieved because it's a phone. So what are we first going to say? What are you doing with that phone? Right? Well, that's the first thing that any human being is going to say. Andy Jr. is going to say, I'm going to call my dad. What's the officer going to say? No, you're not. You're going to wait until I'm done, and then you can call your dad, right? And then the young man says, but I have to call my dad, because if I don't call my dad, so that's another situation that we're encountering more and more out in the neighborhoods, on the streets. Does that help out?
It did. It made me a little scared as well. But just that you have the understanding and that you're sensitive to the dynamic that's going on in that individual's head. Also, I've seen where students, they'll come out, and if something's going on with a police officer, everybody's pulling out their phone, and you don't know what they're
Correct.
doing. And like you can see it in a video from another person, that everybody's in the process of pulling something out, and they're trying to get their cameras so they can all record. It's just a different dynamic now.
And we're training. We train, we have now included in our training that very issue, that individuals reaching into their pockets, wherever it may be, is not necessarily a threatening act. I mean, reaching is threatening, but if the result is a phone, then, you know, we now exercise a little bit more self-control. Now, we don't always get it right. If we always got it right, then we wouldn't have these two counselors over here on the left hand. We don't always get it right, but we need them. We need them to keep us in check, and we also need you to keep us in check. And our training includes feedback that we get from sessions just like this. We have to understand, at the end of the day, it's about understanding where each other is coming from and understanding where we want to be in the next 15 or 20 minutes.
Can I ask a question? How does this scenario, just as far as we have gotten, not the rest, change if there is the smell of alcohol or marijuana when an officer approaches the car?
Now there's an introduction now of illegal activity,
So we're just talking about the smell
just a
of
smell.
either one of those things.
Either one of those, correct. And that frequently is the case. We will roll up on a vehicle and the windows go down. and you know, there's this, you know, flurry of smoke, or there's this thing, and then of course we get the question, why are you stopping me?
Mm-hmm.
And then we say, well, you got to ask that question. I mean, you know, just this very fact. And then of course, it may not be the smoke of an illegal substance, but it could also be the presence of empty bottles, or half-filled bottles, or maybe just remnants of what may have been left in that bottle. You know, we're all human beings, right? And remember when we were growing up, and remember when we did stuff we weren't supposed to do, and remember how we try to cover up and put away those things that we weren't supposed to do. Inevitably, somebody's going to kick the can, and somebody's going to knock the bottle over. Inevitably, it always happens.
My God.
Right?
Jeez.
That by itself doesn't mean that you're automatically going to be detained, or arrested. You may be detained, but that doesn't mean that you're going to wind up in a jail or, you know, back at the station. But understand that is going to give a reason for a police officer now to dig a little bit more. Why am I hearing cans in the back seat? Why am I seeing all this smoke? And why am I smelling? You know, there's this thing that we use called probable cause. And probable cause is obtained through any of the 5 senses, through touching, hearing, smelling, seeing, in some cases tasting. I wouldn't recommend our officers get involved with tasting stuff, but we could use any of our 5 senses to establish a reason for going to the next step.
And I always define probable cause. I always said the easiest way for me to define it to young people is that something is happening and you probably are the individual who's involved with it. You know, probable cause is just that you give the officer an extra reason to look for something else. And so if they smell marijuana, then that gives them the reason to ask you to step out of the car and see if they see the marijuana there or something like that. And so that's the probable cause. Something is going on and you probably did it. I used to say to the individual, but is a crime that could be afoot. And so that gives them an opportunity or a reason to search further to make sure there's no criminal activity.
That's where the plain view piece may come in at. So if an officer sees an open bottle or learns of an open bottle or cans in the back seat, or the smell of marijuana, or sees some remnants up front anywhere, sees some baggies, sees anything, Now that is in plain view of the officer. So all of you individuals in the car may be asked to step out. They're definitely gonna ask for you to identify yourself. They're gonna ask who's smoking. Not me, not me, not me, and not me. So nobody's smoking in the car. So now we need to check the car. So now that we check the car and we find alcohol or marijuana and nobody's using it, everybody's charged with it.
Somebody starts talking.
Right.
Everybody's charged with it. Well, it wasn't mine, it was his. It wasn't mine, it was his. So then we get the blame game, and what I'm talking about is what we get in court. So by the time it gets to court, everybody is charged with it, and then a defendant will say, well, how can everybody be charged with one gun? Easy. Look at the paperwork. Everyone's charged until we can determine who it belongs to. So whenever an officer sees anything in plain view, they can ask you to get out of the car, to identify yourself, to search the car, and then you may have charges or something more that comes
And
from
let
that.
me ask Attorney Evans, if they ask you to step out of the car, can they search you?
If they're just asking you to step out of the car, they are not supposed to search you unless there is some reason that they believe, based on officer safety, that you may have a weapon or something like that that is of harm to yourself and to the officer. That's how it's supposed to be.
So it's called a Terry search. If you hear people talking
Pat
about
down.
it's just a pat down.
Right.
That they're looking for weapons.
There's supposed to be reasonable suspicion, which is less than probable cause. You hear us throw out all these different buzzwords, but there's supposed to be reasonable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot, and they're only supposed to do a limited search or frisk of basically the outer garments of the person to determine that there are no weapons, that the individual is not carrying any weapons. Now, realistically speaking, does it always go in all of these little book terms? No, it doesn't. As the chief will tell you much better than I, because he's been out on the street, that things happen, and things happen very quickly. Unfortunately, as we say, they're not supposed to do it. Does it happen sometimes? Of course it does. But again, that's where we come in. Hopefully, if something like that happens in an unfortunate circumstance, and if the circumstance happens that based on the frisk that something was recovered, we might be able to argue that later, that they didn't have the right to stop the car in the first place. They didn't have suspicion to bring the person out and search. They didn't have probable cause to go and do all those other things. We can try to search, we can try to file briefs and do other things later to argue that. But unfortunately, at the time that we're there, or that the stop is being made, the officer is going to do what he needs to do in order to make sure that he is safe, that you are safe, and that everything else happens the way that it happens.
So, I'm going to use the scenario one and then the factors that Attorney Kennedy had added to it. Do the officer have a right to search the vehicle on scenario one when they didn't see anything in plain view? And do they have a right to search it if they see something in plain view?
I do not believe that they have a right to search the vehicle if they do not see anything in plain view. There is no probable cause to search that vehicle. Again, there has to be some sort of reason, some sort of basis for a search, not just because the officer believes that there might be something going on. That's not enough. There has to be some justification for it. So based on scenario one, just the fact of the individuals not wanting to identify themselves does not, in my opinion, does not support probable cause to search that vehicle. There's nothing else there. However, in the scenario that Joy presented, based on the smell of marijuana, based on the immediate plain view observation of open containers, which is illegal to drive with open containers, based on that, that's probable cause that a crime has been committed, that someone in the car has been smoking marijuana, that someone in the car has been drinking alcoholic beverages. Based on that, probable cause that a crime has been committed, they can then search the car,
And
in
do
my
the
opinion.
police need a warrant?
No.
Yes.
At what point in time, when you're stopped by the police, are they required to answer your questions? example, random sobriety test, pulled over. And they always want to know, you know, got my stuff ready, so you don't need to ask me for it, you don't think I'm fishing around, pulling down. So I hand them my stuff. You hand them your license, proof of insurance, registration. And they always want, they ask you, where are you going? And in my opinion, you know, if I ask them, why did you, do you know why I stopped you? No. You know, if they tell you, they tell you. Or, why did you stop me? Where are you going? Where are you coming from? What business is it of theirs? And why, when do they answer my question when I ask them, why are you asking me that question?
You wanna take that?
Or
Chief?
you want me to?
Either
Well,
one
I'll
of you.
start, and you can pick up on it.
Okay.
You know, that is the source of a lot of complaints that are filed against police officers, is citizens believe that police officers have gone beyond what they're supposed to do. The truth is, when you are the driver of the vehicle, and you, as a driver, we have committed a traffic violation. At that point, you have to comply by law with every single question, every single direction, every single directive that the police officer gives you. Because there is an infraction. By law, some officers would say I'm duty bound to correct or to do something about that infraction. And so, part of the officer's responsibility at that point is to find out, based on what their observations are, where you're coming from, where you're going. Because if I determine through that discussion that you are unable to operate this vehicle, or that there are other factors that are giving me some spidey senses that are making some flags go up, I'm responsible for you while I have you stopped. And in order for me to let you go and absolve that responsibility, return it back to you, I've got to make sure that I'm comfortable in not only in that interaction, but I got to be confident that I'm returning the vehicle, returning you back on the road in a safe way.
And let me add this too. On a sobriety checkpoint, a lot of people don't know you don't have to go through those. They have to give you an out, which is maybe a block down the street that you can turn left or right. But once you're committed in that checkpoint, once you pass that certain point, and they have their random number, how they stop the cars. It might be every 3 cars, every 5 cars. Then you have to comply with everything that they ask you. And sometimes they're asking you that to see if you came from a bar or something.
That's
Or the Browns
uh,
game.
Exactly.
Or the Browns game to see maybe you were drinking there.
right.
But see,
Which is
you're
what I was
saying-
gonna say.
You're saying there's an infraction, and in that case, there may not be any infraction at all. You know, the person did not smell of alcohol, they were driving appropriately, there was nothing to give you, they were just waving people over.
Right. But if you're in that checkpoint, you may be that 3rd car. They're not supposed to stop unless they're stopping every car, but most of them is a random stop. So once you're in there, they're thinking that you may have committed something.
That is really far-fetched.
I
I'm
know.
sorry, that's really far-fetched for them to make that assumption.
Right.
When someone is driving along the street, doesn't appear to be intoxicated or under the influence.
Right.
So my question is, when they ask you, where are you coming from and where have you been? And the driver says, why are you asking me that? Why does the officer respond to say, because, as opposed to repeating the question again?
Well,
Or should they even answer the person?
They-
The police officer should answer the driver.
I got stopped in the checkpoint one time and they had me do my alphabet and everything. But I didn't tell them I was a judge. I just did it, and I was coming from the potentate ball. But they did ask me where was I going. I told them I was going home. Where did I come from? I just said an event. I didn't tell them where. But I guess it's the officer, their personality, if they're going to answer you or not.
but I know that they can ask the question. And do you think it's the personality also, the officer?
The judge is correct, you know, it could be, officers have this thing called discretion. And as a chief, discretion really concerns me. Because as a chief, I'm setting policy, I'm setting direction, and I'm saying, all our officers should do this. All our officers should explain the reason for the stop. All our officers should ask some very common sense, clear questions, not foggy and, you know, questions that incite to other things. Unfortunately, every policeman in the state of Ohio, every state trooper in the state of Ohio, every sheriff in the state of Ohio, by nature of the authority given to them, comes a certain level of discretion. And what that means is that the law and our training allows officers to react and to do things based on what they're perceiving at that time. I would love to control that perception, but unfortunately, we are all human beings, and every human being reacts differently to situations. And as I mentioned before, folks, as policemen, we're human beings, and we don't always get it right. We don't always get it right.
Okay, so we have our stop sign up. I think we could have continued this a lot longer, but it's time for us to go back to the main auditorium. I am so happy for this panel. I want to thank you all. You were excellent. I could talk law all day. And all of these learned individuals, please give them a hand. So you can always ask questions any other time, and if you, I'm sure, need someone to come and speak to your youth group, we all will be available to do that. Okay, so thank you, everyone.